Our first scripture reading today comes from the book of First Kings. We're reading from chapter 17, verses 8 through 24. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, saying, "Go now to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and live there. I have commanded a widow there to feed you." So he set out and went to Zarephath. When he came to the gate of the town, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and said, "Give me a little water in a vessel so that I may drink." As she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, "Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand." But she said, "As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of meal in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I am now gathering a couple of sticks so that I may go home, myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Elijah said to her, "Do not be afraid. Go and do as you have said. But first make me a little cake and bring it to me, and afterwards make something for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of meal will not be emptied, and the jug of oil will not fail, until the day when the Lord sends rain on the earth." She went and did as Elijah said, so that she as well as he and her household ate for many days. The jar of meal was not emptied, neither did the jug of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke. After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill. His illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. She then said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." But he said to her, "Give me your son." He took him from her bosom, carried him up into the upper chamber where he was lodging, and laid him on his own bed. He cried out to the Lord my God, "Have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I am staying by killing your son?" And then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord my God, "Let this child's life come into him again." The Lord listened to the voice of Elijah. The life of the child came into him again, and he revived. Elijah took the child, brought him down from the upper chamber into the house, and gave him to his mother. And then Elijah said, "See, your son is alive." So the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." Then we turn to the New Testament, to the Gospel according to Luke chapter, verses 25 through 20. Jesus said, "But the truth is, there were many widows in Israel at the time of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, and there was a severe famine over all the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them, except to a widow at Zarephath in Sidon. There were also many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was found, except Naaman the Syrian." May God bless for understanding these readings from. Our reading today from 1 Kings focused on the prophet Elijah during a very difficult time in the history of Israel. The kingdom of Israel had fallen into idol worship. It was a time of a severe drought. Water had become scarce, and food perhaps even scarcer. And then Elijah was on the run from King Ahab and his wicked wife Jezebel. So the Lord called to Elijah to go out into the wilderness, saying, "There you'll find food and water." Elijah went. And then eventually the water there dried. The Lord called him to go to another place. He sent him to what must have seemed like a very unlikely place to go. found out the widow had very few resources. She had a son, but as we read, she was gathering sticks, make what sounds like she thought would be a last meal. Nothing. But even though this call sounded so strange, or I guess it would have, he went where the Lord was calling. One of the things that the Bible tells us leads to a fulfilling life is that if the Lord calls people to go somewhere, do something, then they need to go there and to do what the Lord is calling them to do. Our Presbyterian women have begun study of the book of Jonah. If you know that story, God calls Jonah to go to a place called Nineveh. But instead, he basically heads in the opposite direction. And then he's thrown overboard from the ship he's on, swallowed by a big fish, and spewed up on dry land. And then Jonah decides, I better go to where the Lord was calling me to go. And he did. And he succeeded in what the Lord was calling him to do there. Another story from this time in the New Testament, from Acts chapter 8, is about Philip, the disciple of Jesus. And when the Lord called him to go out into the wilderness, with, it sounds like, a few instructions about what he was to do or what was going to happen, we read that Philip got up and went. And there he met an Ethiopian man who lead him to faith in Jesus Christ. And so Philip also succeeded in what the Lord had called him to do. And our task today, in different places and different circumstances, is really similar to what Philip and Jonah had to do. Our task is not so much to fully understand what the Lord is calling us to do, but to go to where God's Spirit is leading us, and to do what God is calling us to do in faith. And it may only be later on we more fully understand what that call is about. Elijah, God calling him to go to a place called Zarephath, outside of the country of Israel. Again, when he arrived, he found this widow who was very poor. Times were hard all over, not just in Israel, but in surrounding areas. And he asked her for some water and some food. And she responded, as the Lord your God lives, I have only a handful of meal. I am now gathering a couple of sticks so that I may go home and prepare food for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. So Elijah said to her, do not be afraid, do as I have said, for thus says the God of Israel. The jar of meal will not be emptied, and the jug of oil will not fail until the day that the Lord sends rain. And the widow did as Elijah asked her to do, and as we read, she and her household ate for many days, and the jar of meal was not empty, and neither did the jug fail. But then this widow's life took a very unexpected and apparently very sad turn. Her son became ill, died. There's an old, I think, memorable line from the old Hee Haw TV show. Maybe some of you remember that. That line said, if it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. I wonder if that widow didn't feel anything like that. Son passed on. Jesus was certainly full of compassion, I think especially for poorer people. And I think it was in that same spirit that Elijah tried to minister to this. And when her son stopped breathing, here's what she said to Elijah. What have you against me? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son. Her comment was representative of what many people believe in. They believed that, for example, the death of a son was caused by some sin that they had committed. This was the punishment that God was sending on them. But Elijah took the son, took the Lord on the son's behalf, and pleaded to the Lord, let this child's life come into him again. The Lord granted Elijah's request, and he gave now once again living son to his mother. And here is the widow's response. Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth. Our reading doesn't fill in all the details about that response, but I think that what happened with her son being revived not only brought the widow joy and really confirmed that she could trust in Elijah, who she called a man of God, but I think it also made her take a look and trust in Elijah's God. I mean, think about this woman. For what we know about her and her situation, she was a worshiper of idols and had been brought up in a family that lifestyle was presented, and her community probably reaffirmed that. That's from what we know about Zarephath then and her community. And yet this woman had a good heart, spirit, and she was willing to take in this stranger named Elijah into her. A man not only from another region, but of another faith. Now, I have to believe that when this story got back to the people of Israel, it was a hard one for them to grasp, because there were many people in Israel at the time, including many widows, who were suffering from famine. And yet, Elijah was sent to another country, to a widow there, to be of help to her. But I think this passage reminds us that God is not only a God of the people of Israel, but God is a God of all people, in other areas, other religions, which was not always what the people of Israel believed. Listening again to what Jesus did in our reading today from Luke, there were many widows in Israel. There was a severe famine in the land, yet Elijah was sent to none of them, except the widow of Zarephath. And Jesus continued, there were many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, who followed along right after the prophet. And yet none of them were cleansed, except Naaman, the Syrian. Now, some might quote here the old saying, charity begins at home. But I believe a better saying, according to our readings today, is this: charity begins wherever there is a need. And I think this really goes back to the covenant that God made with the people of Israel, beginning with Abram and Sarah in Genesis chapter 12. You may know the story well about how God came to Abram, who later became known as Abraham. Said, I'm going to make a covenant with you. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless you with many descendants. Later said, I'm going to bless your people with land on which to live. But there was a key part of this covenant that I think sometimes was forgotten. And that is, God's covenant was not only about blessing the people of Israel, but through them, blessing the world. And as we read this familiar verse from the Gospel according to John, I think it has a similar theme to it. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish. There was a book that was published in 1953. Didn't realize it was quite that old, but it was a very popular and influential book in the day, and I think a lot of people are still at least somewhat familiar with this message. It was a book written by J.B. Phillips entitled Your God is Too Small. And the book speaks to how our faith may be, well, perhaps too small. And perhaps we could also say that that's what happened to the Jewish people who thought that God's blessing was only to be for them, when God in his covenant with them had called them to be a blessing to the world. Philip's book, again entitled Your God is Too Small, I think challenges us in part to look at our understanding of God. And ask the question, is our understanding of God too narrow, too limited, too... Again, Elijah must have been wondering, why is God sending me out of the country to Zarephath to worship idols? And he got there and there was this widow and so few resources. And yet Elijah went to where God was calling him. And again, that's what the prophet Elisha did. When he was called to go and heal a leper in Naaman, who was not of the people of Israel, but who was Syrian. And I think, again, such acts speak to God's call to Israel to be a blessing to the whole, and not just to keep God's blessings for themselves. I have to believe again that what happened with this widow, how the food continued when she had so little, and how Elijah helped to bring her son back to life, confirmed her faith in the God of Israel. And I think part of our call as we encounter other people of other religions, of other faiths, is to be kind enough and loving enough so that perhaps the Spirit of God would come through us to them. And that our hope would be that somehow, as the Spirit works, they might also come to faith in Jesus Christ. I was recently reminded of what Mahatma Gandhi, who led the successful campaign for the country of India's independence, what Gandhi said, being a Christian. He said, I might have become a Christian except for the Christians that I knew. And I hope that as we go out to be of help to other people, there'll be a positive we can give them. And a reminder from our story today that God's call through us goes out to the whole world. And here's what I would call a first-hand reminder to us. It's true, through the ministry of Megan Meyer that we have helped to support in her work in the country, the charity. God chose the Jewish people to be a blessing to the world. God has also chosen us as the church, sometimes called the New Israel. And it's the same call to us, not to keep God's blessings for ourselves, but to share them with the world. So what's God going to call us to do? Well, I don't know. Maybe he won't call us to go to a different area. But wherever we go, I hope we can be like someone who finds a way, with God's help, to be a blessing. Because that's part of our calling. And as we obey God and follow in God's footsteps, may we help others discover that our God, who even sent his Son to live among us and die for us, that our God is a God who loves all.